The world is totally changing because of the new and interconnected way with which we're able to interact with each other. The internet has caused one of the biggest communication shifts since the invention of the printing press. For Christians, this shift means that we are able to carry out the Great Commission, the mission given by Jesus to his disciples before he left the earth, in brand new ways. Today we're going to look at the internet and the gospel. Specifically, we're going to look at the opportunities and challenges facing us because of the internet. We're going to look at how Christians can take these opportunities in order to spread the gospel. And we're going to look at how Christians should navigate the new digital age in which we find ourselves. As I said, the internet is changing the way that we interact with each other. In the past, to reach someone on the other side of the planet meant to travel to another country all the way on the other side of the earth. But now you can do it with the click of a button on your phone. Missions in the past have always been about going to where the people are. But now we're all connected and the people are here. Every day, people spend more than 2.5 hours on their phone on the internet. And most of that is spent on social media. Let's look at just one social media website in particular, YouTube. YouTube has more than 2 billion users uploading more than 1 billion hours of content every day. It's localized in more than 100 countries and in more than 80 languages. In the marketing demographic of 18 to 49-year-olds, which is one of the most desirable markets for advertising, YouTube reaches more people than any broadcast or cable network. Among millennials, YouTube accounts for more than 2/3 of the premium video content watched. The democratization of content means that the barrier for entry is no longer the ability to go overseas and communicate with people. It's simply an internet connection. Brett McCracken is a senior editor for the Gospel Coalition, a popular Christian website. He also writes for other Christian publications about the intersection of media and arts and Christianity. This is what he had to say about how the internet is shaping our culture.
The internet basically does away with physical distance challenges, like national boundaries, borders, distance. So it created this potential where some article that was written in, South Africa could be read by someone in China who doesn't have access to that perspective of the South African writer. But on the internet, right, we all have access to everything. And so it just created like a real opportunity for the gospel to be more fluid in how it passed from place to place. So it's not like 100 years ago where you had to like send someone over a great distance to take the gospel to an unreached people group or whatever. Like, it's good to still do that with physical missionaries, of course, but the internet provides this potential for reaching people, unreached people, just on Google, right?
There are two key aspects of this statement that I want to focus on. The first is that it reflects what the statistics show. The internet is where the people are. The internet is where we go to ask questions, whether they be mundane questions or the big questions of life. There are two key aspects to his statement here that I want to focus on. The first is that he echoes what the statistics show. The internet is where the people are. People are going online to search for their questions, whether that be about a mundane task that they need to do or about the major questions of life. Mike McDonald is the Director of Global Focus and Strategic Relationships for the BibleProject, something you may have heard of. The BibleProject is an online nonprofit created by John Collins and Dr. Tim Mackey. They make animated videos explaining the Bible. They reach more than 2.5 million people on their English YouTube channel alone. So, as such, Mike McDonald has a lot of experience with YouTube and specifically the way that people are coming to the internet with their questions.
Do that too. If I need to fix my sink, I go right onto YouTube. All right, how do I fix a sink? But it's the same thing when it comes to questions about the Bible. When you've got people that maybe they can't have these conversations with their families because of religious persecution and everything else, they're going to jump onto YouTube in their own home and go, who is Jesus? What does this mean? Who is God? And we're finding that so many people are asking those questions.
Additionally, Mike has a lot of experience with the broad kind of audience that you can find on YouTube.
Both, gosh, I think right now we're getting about 500,000 views a day on the videos, so which is wild to think about that. Over 50% of the views come from outside the United States, so more people watch it outside the US than even inside the US. So from a global standpoint, YouTube doesn't recognize necessarily countries, but it recognizes like sovereign states. And I think in all the 209 sovereign states that YouTube recognizes, we've had views in every single one of those around the world.
This statement is staggering. In an age where we can take the global interconnectedness of our world for granted, it's crazy to think about the fact that people used to risk life and limb traveling around the world to share the message of Jesus. And now a small team of people based out of Oregon have been able to share scripture-based content in every single one of the sovereign nations that their platform recognizes. Going back to Brett's first statement, another key aspect of that is where he talks about how we can't replace the local church. The local manifestations of the church are still just as important in our digital age as they always have been. I want to touch on that more in a little bit because I think that plays a very important role in how we interact with the internet. As we continue to think about how Christians can use the internet to spread the gospel, we have to understand the problems that are currently plaguing us as we attempt to use the internet. There are people using the internet specifically to create false and misleading news articles and images for the premeditated purpose of lying to others. This has become a hot button issue over the course of the last few years and has taken on a lot of different names, but the technical terms are misinformation and disinformation. This section of what we're talking about right now is going to take two presuppositions. The first presupposition is that misinformation and disinformation are real and are harming us. And the second presupposition is that Christians are not immune to succumbing to the lies that are given to us through misinformation and disinformation. It's important to note here two very different and technical terms. Misinformation is any sort of content on the internet that may be considered misleading. Disinformation is anything that is being created misleading on purpose. To put it more simply, misinformation may be accidental in misleading its audience. Disinformation is created with the sole purpose of misleading its audience. As great as the internet has been allowing us to communicate with each other in new and exciting ways, it's also allowed these lies to be spread on a scale unlike anything before in human history. These two things, misinformation and disinformation, are causing people to retreat into their ideological holes. We don't trust the people that we disagree with anymore, and we like to hear the things that confirm what we already believe. So we replace the people with whom we disagree with avatars and text on screen rather than actually talking and having a conversation. The result is that we trust others less. We accept the lies that are tickling our ears rather than digging deeper and seeing if the claims being made are actually true. And the worst part is, it's all happening too quickly for us to actually process and understand.
We can like see one thing and be like, yeah, like he's right. And then we can retweet it and reshare it before we've actually like thought like, actually, is this accurate? Is this being, accurately presented, or should I be a little bit more discerning in taking this with a grain of salt? I think the speed of social media is one of the biggest problem areas. It goes too fast to allow for real critical evaluation to take place. So that's why conspiracy theories can go viral, right? Because no one's really taking the time to like investigate. Is what I'm sharing actually like factually like true? Is it really wise to be spreading this around?
The speed of social media and the rate that the lies are spreading are problematic. But the worst part is, we believe them. Even after it's been corrected, misinformation sticks in our heads and changes the way that we think. And this misinformation isn't just the stuff that we willingly read and accept. Every day as we open our social media feeds, we're being fed information that we don't even realize we're being exposed to. All of this information is so ingrained in our environment that we're absorbing all of this information that is changing the way that we think and interact with the world. So that brings us to a question. How do Christians respond in a world where lies are being spread at alarming rates?
Well, that's the most often asked question that I'm getting right now from pastors and church leaders. And there's not a close second. Because this is what's happening and hitting people in every single congregation.
That's Dr. Russell Moore. He's the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission for the Southern Baptist Convention. Between the time of recording and releasing, Dr. Moore left the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission and the Southern Baptist Convention. He is now the public theologian at Christianity Today and a minister in residence at Emmanuel Nashville in Nashville, Tennessee. The rest of the information here is still accurate. He also hosts a podcast where he speaks with other Christian leaders of today. He writes a weekly newsletter and has hundreds of thousands of followers across his other social media platforms. The statement here shows just how much of a problem misinformation and disinformation are, not just at the world at large, but in the Christian community. This new problem, however, has to be addressed not at a surface level, but in a way that digs deep into the issues at hand.
There isn't a way to fix this in a Sunday morning or in a sermon series, because I'll say usually what you're seeing in terms of social media and your people is sort of like starlight, that by the time you see it, you're seeing the after effects of something from long ago. And so it's going to take a long-term sort of acclimating people to understanding how to think. And that's going to mean modeling it. It's going to mean calling it out when it's not there, but it's not going to be fixed easily.
So the question then remains, how do we engage with the culture in a way that pushes back against the lies that are so prominent? Is there a way to harness the medium that has been used for such damaging ends for good in order to push back against the deep harm that lies being spread on the internet have caused? Christians can and should use the internet, and especially social media, to spread light in a dark world. In a sense, this work is already being done by groups like the BibleProject and Third Millennium Ministries. Additionally, many individuals have taken it upon themselves to create content on their own that speaks light into a dark world. Of course, this introduces its own problems. The democratization of content has been a great thing for many creators, but in the realm of the Christian community, it brings up issues of theological accuracy and production quality. So Christians approach two issues in creating content for the internet. The first is that it must be theologically sound. It must be biblically grounded. But secondly, it must be done in a way that is accessible to the audience, engaging, and done in a way that is healthy for the viewer. On the note of being theologically sound, I believe that speaks for itself. All of the content being created should be rooted in Scripture. However, the issue of creating content that is accessible and healthy for the audience is a much deeper issue. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about here. When it comes to creating accessible and engaging content on the internet, one of the first things we have to do is understand the technology that we're working with. In the past, Christians have been almost always on the forefront of new technology. At the advent of the printing press, the Bible was one of the first books printed. Early radio stations hosted sermons by popular preachers. Many of the early silent films, and many films since then, turned to the Bible for inspiration. Television launched the careers of people like Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell and caused countless thousands to come to Christ. New technology always affords new opportunities for the gospel. And now, with the internet, we have the ability to reach people all over the world. Rather than creating our own subculture of special content just for us, we have the ability to go out into the world creating content that engages the culture in new and exciting ways. This, of course, poses all sorts of problems for us, too. How should Christians engage with technology? How much is too much?
I think that there's probably too much of a use of technology in the formal worship of the church, and not enough use of technology in the informal wing of the church. So if you think about it, the way that D. Martin Lloyd-Jones in England in the 20th century used to divide the difference between Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings. He would have a Sunday morning service that was a typical worship service and typical preaching event in his theological tradition and ecclesial tradition. And then Sunday evening was specifically for evangelism. It didn't mean that evangelism wasn't going on Sunday morning, but it meant that Sunday evening there was a different way of speaking specifically to people who were who would not want to come to a Sunday morning worship service, but who could go in a safe way, relatively speaking, and hear the gospel were they curious about this. So I think that we use a little bit too much technology and use it badly often in terms of our Sunday morning lives, and we don't use it well enough in our Sunday evening lives, if you can use that division.
When it comes to new technology, the issue is not that Christians are not using it. The issue is instead how we are using it. Too often, churches are misapplying the use of new technology. We're turning inward, trying to make our church services look more like the increasingly digital world, rather than pushing those resources outward in an effort to reach people who have never heard the gospel. We believe that the gospel has the answer for what ails the world. But if we cannot effectively communicate that message in an increasingly noisy and crowded world, our message will probably fall on deaf ears. We must then reevaluate how we are using technology in order to move forward. Mike Winger is a pastor and creator on the internet, creating live stream content to answer viewer questions about theological issues. Over the past 3 years, he's created more than 500 videos and amassed more than 230,000 subscribers at the time of writing. He says, "My one tip is to make content tailored to the platform that it is being used on, rather than just throwing up stuff that was made to fit a mold from 30 years ago. This means learning a platform well." What this means is that instead of putting up old sermons and hoping that it reaches someone with the gospel, we should be creating content that specifically is made to live on the platform we're uploading to. One of the primary reasons for this is that each platform and each medium is going to reach almost an entirely different audience.
A lot of what's happening in terms of different media is that there's a great deal of overlap because one is speaking to completely different audiences based on medium, with very few exceptions, which is one of the things that is a little bit surprising to me, because there will be times when I'll think, well, I just wrote about this, why would I do a video about it, or vice versa? Or why would I do a podcast about something that I have written on? But they're entirely different. I mean, and even sometimes even within the medium itself, there are great differences.
Not only does one need to understand the medium that they are using, they must understand who's going to see their video. Users use each platform differently, and these two ideas, understanding what a platform does and how a user uses that platform, feed off of each other. Those coming to the internet looking for answers to their questions are expecting something vastly different than what those in the pews on a Sunday morning are expecting. The internet moves at a quicker pace, and that must be addressed, but the immediacy of the internet can also be one of the greatest assets in creating Christian content.
One of the opportunities with the internet is you can be a lot more timely, and you can be more engaged in just what's happening now, and what are the questions people are asking now, and literally you can find that out. You can do some Google search term research to figure out what are the most searched for questions in spirituality right now, in Christianity. So we literally do that at the Gospel Coalition, where we generate content in part to meet these specific search terms that are common that people are asking about.
Being able to answer questions in almost real time is one of the great gifts of this new technology. Meeting people where they are is the biblical model and should be continued to be practiced even as the world changes in dramatic ways. The vastness and interconnected nature of this new medium cannot be overstated. It allows people to stumble into new ideas in ways that were not previously possible. And that's important because that's really how people change their minds and come to believe something new.
I think one of the great advantages for the church's witness when it comes to internet is that there's an ability for people to overhear conversations. So if you think about what the Apostle Paul is doing, for instance, at the Areopagus, he's speaking to a defined group of people, but there's an audience listening in on what's going on. And some of them, Luke tells us in Acts, walk away saying this is crazy, and others say we want to listen to this some more. Okay, well, that second category, the internet enables a lot of those people to listen in, and that's how people actually change. People don't change their minds because they've lost an argument. Instead, what people want to do is to say, can I listen in on something and ponder it?
Once you understand how the mechanics of a platform work and how the users respond to that platform, a whole new set of problems emerges. The global nature of the internet means that the people viewing your content may or may not be from your home country or culture. To combat this, some level of contextualization has to take place in order for people to respond to the message of the gospel in a way that brings about true change. Third Millennium Ministries, also known as Third Mill, was started by Dr. Richard Pratt with the intention of creating free biblical education materials for the world. The project was originally done in English with American presenters and interviewees. As the project began to spread throughout the world, there were many issues that emerged. The first was the question of translation.
Which is, of course, the issue of, is this material of good quality? I mean, that's just a simple question you got to answer yourself. Like, am I getting person, Joe Smith from country X, and they're translating the materials, but are they a good translator? And so we'd have to establish an entire quality control process by which we were able to then not only have the translator, but then get experts in the field to be able to vet or quality control the material and say, yes, this is good quality, or no.
You just heard from Eric Linares. He's the vice president of production for Third Mill. He's been with the project since the early days of shipping VHS tapes across the world to now being able to create content on the internet and ship micro SD cards to countries where internet access is limited. Clearly, Third Mill is dedicated to making sure that the translations that they produce are high quality and accessible to those who are receiving it. However, there's another issue when it comes to accessibility of these materials. Third Mill is an American ministry, and that means that the people in the videos, for the most part, are American, which typically means that the presenters do not necessarily look like those who are receiving the material.
A lot of times, what we've suggested to our partners is, and that's part of the open-handedness of Third Mill, is we said to them, cut up our videos. Cut them up. Like, take out all of our American faces if you want and put in your faces, your Asian faces, your Latin American faces, your Eastern European faces, African faces. Take videos. Talk about what you want to talk about. We don't care. I mean, obviously, don't take it out of context. Don't edit it into something, don't Frankenstein it into something bad. But at the same time, we are more than happy for you to take the pieces that you think might be beneficial to you. And then you can add whatever pieces you want to add to it. And that's what some of our groups have done. Interestingly enough, we've encouraged them. And a few of our partner groups out in the field, particularly in Africa, they've gone through and they've recorded a whole series of their own introductions to some of our lessons. And so that's where they get the more contextualized perspective.
It is vital that when we're giving people biblical education and instruction, we remove as many barriers as possible. This doesn't mean changing the content of the gospel or of the education, but it does mean making it accessible for the people who are receiving it who may not be familiar with Christianity, and more specifically, the American expression of Christianity. As we export our education, we have to be careful not to export our culture with it. This focus on making sure that the material is accessible to those who are receiving it extends to the things that remain standard throughout the videos.
And what we've tried to do, for example, is we try to be very general in our interpretations visually. So when we're talking about sinfulness, we usually tend to show photos of crowds, for example, or cartoon versions of generic people without faces, or just very generic faces, because we don't want to put like all of a sudden an African face and when talking about sinfulness, and show a European face when we're talking about sanctification, for example. We try to showcase a wide variety of people. That's not easy, to be honest with you, because most of the high-end stock photography that we tend to borrow tends to be kind of the hallmark Americanized looking, good looking people.
BibleProject, another nonprofit dedicated to making video content that is biblical education, has faced similar issues of contextualization. The videos are animated, which was a specific choice by the creators because it allowed for easier contextualization and translation. BibleProject, another online video ministry, has faced similar issues of contextualization. Their videos are animated, which was a specific choice on the creator's part because it allows for the Bible to take the center stage of the videos, and it allows for contextualization to happen a little more easily. However, this means that a great deal of work must be done in order to make sure that the videos are accessible to a broad audience while also maintaining the quality of the videos.
We have studios around the world, about 60 of them, that are working on localizing the content into their specific language. And so and that's full reanimation, re-illustration, all of that. Because if you notice, a lot of our videos have text on screen or things that we would actually need to redo. An example also is like we just had this in Japan where in the How to Read series, there's like some cartoon comic books that are shown with like Batman and other things. We changed all of those to be Japanese style comic books so that culturally it's very relevant to whoever's watching it. And so it's a full localization.
In addition to the visuals, there's a lot of translation work to do. These things go hand in hand as a lot of videos require reanimation after translation to make sure that the voiceover and the images align. The team at the BibleProject then uploads the videos to their own YouTube channel, and they launch localized channels in each of the different languages.
We've got, I think, 36 YouTube channels that have been launched. The other 14 are in the process of translation. Some languages we have our whole library, like Spanish. We have like every English video we have done in Spanish as well. Others we're just starting, like Myanmar, Burmese language, we're starting right now. So like it's going to take a few months to get the first video up. Once we launch a language, we're usually producing a video a week onto YouTube. And we commit to about 100 videos to start off, and then we might add our whole library depending on how it does. But I think we've got about 2,000 videos that have been fully translated and localized of our library.
This method of contextualizing content is probably new ground for many, but it's necessary as we spread the gospel through the nations by way of the internet. Just as we would train a missionary in the culture where we are sending them, we must do the same for the content that we are creating. Doing this ensures against exporting our own culture while maintaining the life-changing gospel of Jesus. It's safe to say that 2020 will be seen as a turning point for the way that we interact with technology and the internet. The COVID-19 pandemic and the social distancing measures and lockdown measures used to counteract it led to people using social media as a way to stay connected with their family and friends when they were apart. Though the pandemic did not directly cause any of these changes in our culture in regards to the internet, it did accelerate it.
And especially in this year with COVID, we're starting to see, we've fast forwarded this year, I think by 5 to 8 years. When it comes to like video conferencing, what we're doing right now, yeah, it was happening, but not at the level where you've got grandparents that now know how to Zoom and look up things on the internet. You've got people that normally weren't going to the internet that were forced to do it because of COVID. So we've catapulted things into the future, I think, at a crazy rate. And so, yeah, I think it's a big part.
The data supports what McDonald is saying. In 2020, average screen time jumped from 3 hours to 7 hours. And this increase probably gives us an idea of what our future is going to look like, troubling as that may be. Whether we like it or not, the internet, social media, technology, it's all here to stay. The question that remains is whether or not this is actually going to be a good thing for us.
It's ultimately going to be a bad thing. And I don't say that as somebody who, I did not start out as a social media skeptic at all. As a matter of fact, I was more of an enthusiast about the ability of social media to connect people to one another. Now, though, I'm a great deal more pessimistic about social media, not only because of the misinformation that's out there, but also because there are many people who think that they are informed because they're living in a Twitter, specifically Twitter world, in a way that even if all the information that they're receiving is factual, which is not usually the case, but even if it is, the meaning and import behind it is skewed. And I've seen a lot of people who have really been have been shaped in terms of ministries in ways that causes them not to be able to really know the things that matter, like having an attention span that's able to be in scripture for extended amounts of time and able to fit the narrative of scripture together, and being able to understand human nature in a way that takes a lot more Dostoevsky and Hank Williams than it does observing these little manifestations that happen on social media. And I think sometimes that can shake people. So you can see this in really every arena of life.
The internet provides wonderful opportunities for growth. However, that growth comes with responsibility. As our digital lives and our physical lives become more and more intertwined, there's a difficult balancing act that must be maintained. There's a much needed awareness forming around the dangers of social media and its effects on us. The exponential digitization of our world in 2020 led to us having a deeper understanding of the effects of social media, both positive and negative. Yes, we were able to interact with our family and friends when we were isolated, but at the same time, it took a toll on our mental health.
Just the way that the internet it made all of us crazy, right? We were spending more time on the internet than we really wanted to, because what else were we going to do in the lockdown? And it just made us all mad and confused, and we didn't know what to trust and who to trust. So if we have more years like 2020, I think, all bets are off. But yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll kind of course correct a little bit as a society.
The growth and change in technology has obviously had an effect on us as individuals. However, as the world becomes increasingly digital, we have to consider the communal effects as well. We have to look at not just how it's affecting us as individual Christians, but how it's affecting the church as a whole. As the world has moved into an increasingly digital space, the church has followed. On any given social media platform, there are accounts dedicated to Christian ministries, encouragement, and churches. However, there are a couple considerations that we have to take into account as we're thinking about navigating the future as the world continues to become more and more digital. The first is, how do we navigate using all of these new digital technologies while not forsaking the vision of the church as laid out in Scripture? The second is, how do we encourage individual church members to engage with the internet and social media in a healthy way? First, let's consider how we can use these elements without forsaking the mission of the church. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. The writer of Hebrews here gives us a pretty clear direction for how Christians are supposed to act. One of the things that's most relevant for our conversation here is that Christians are not to neglect meeting with one another. But really, it seems impossible to do all of the things directed here unless you are actively part of the local church. Impossible, that is, unless you're able to be literally connected to everyone on earth. This development is still relatively new. However, it seems impossible to deny the fact that being in person still matters. There's an incarnational element of us being able to love and encourage one another, and that is what the local church is meant. This can cause a little bit of a conflict of interest for people who are creating Christian content online.
What I think we have to be careful with, specifically as Christians producing content that's, gospel centered or trying to lead people to the gospel, trying to give them resources for their spiritual journey, we have to be careful that we don't ever try to replace like the local church. So that's something that TGC is really mindful of. We don't want to be like a replacement church. We don't want people to like stop going to church because they have access to amazing sermons and amazing articles and amazing resources from Christian authors and writers on the Gospel Coalition.
Especially because of the way that churches had to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic by providing online worship services, we have to make sure that Christians do not neglect meeting with one another because of the ease of access of Christian content online. The fact of the matter is, that's not the point of church. We have to move away from the content creation aspect of a church service, and we have to look to the things that a church service offers that digital content cannot provide. Pastor and writer Skye Jethani writes that the supply and demand of Bible teaching that spurred on the sermon-centric services of the Protestant Reformation has flipped. In the past, there was not enough Bible teaching and a huge demand for good, high-quality Bible teaching. Now, there's much less demand for Bible teaching and a plethora of high-quality teaching available. His conclusion is that we must accept that discipleship doesn't only take place on Sunday mornings and admit that most Christians aren't getting their Bible teaching primarily through Sunday sermons anymore. Instead, we have to change our approach and address how our church members are interacting and engaging on the internet. It is imperative for the future that we as Christians recognize how we are using social media in both harmful and helpful ways. In a world of fast-moving thoughts and feelings, it can be easy to act without really thinking about what we are thinking, saying, and feeling. Additionally, the ever-present nature of social media can be exhausting. And the answer for all of these things is time.
I think one of those ways is by reclaiming the calendar. I mean, if you think about the pattern of the way that God has created in Genesis with a period of Sabbath, and that's then communicated in the cyclical year of Israel and the cyclical generations of Israel with a year of Jubilee, for instance, which causes the 50th year causes the other 49 to matter. And the seventh day gives meaning to the other 6. It just enables the mind to, if just a little bit, reset. And if somebody's able to do that, the less dependent they become, with some exceptions, on social media. There has to be a level of self-awareness that says, what are the ways that I am uniquely weak, which is going to dictate how much social media I'm going to use and what aspects of social media I'm going to use.
Yes, the internet is providing the opportunity for quality content and for people to be connected like never before. And those things are great and should be celebrated. However, doing anything all the time is not good for the mind or the soul. We have to pace ourselves in how we use social media, and exercising the principle of the Sabbath can be a great way for Christians to interact with social media in a healthier way. We should be encouraging one another in our churches to use wisdom and discernment as we interact in the future. Churches should be conscious of the fact that while there are great thinkers and theologians and writers available on the internet, none of those people are tasked with caring for the local flock like the church and pastors are. Additionally, they don't know what your congregation is going through. A pastor in New York may not be saying the same thing that a church in rural Tennessee may need to hear. The pastors of the local church must make a conscious effort to supply the local church for what they need for life and offer the digital resources as supplementary, not primary. The modern digital age has provided us with numerous opportunities to spread the gospel. The ends of the earth have never been so near. With the push of a button, we can reach literally billions of people. And yet, with the rise in accessing and creating content, there's been a rise in harmful content created to misinform and mislead us. Christians, now more than ever, have the opportunity and the obligation to speak truth into an increasingly darker world. To sum up all the things that we've talked about, there's one key to how Christians should interact with these new and amazing opportunities: wisdom. The internet moves at an alarming speed, and this speed makes it hard to properly evaluate all of the information that is coming at us, and it makes it hard to turn it off. However, both of these things are necessary if we are going to use the internet and social media in a way that adequately engages the culture. Wisdom is the need of the hour, and the source of wisdom is Scripture. We must be rooted in a biblical faith so that we are not swept by every wind of doctrine that comes at us through our Twitter feeds. We cannot and should not disengage from the amazing opportunities that are afforded to us by the developments of our digital age. But we cannot run into these opportunities recklessly. Instead, we should engage with the culture thoughtfully and prayerfully, seeking wisdom through the fear of the Lord.